Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Arrington and I am presenting about leprosy. Leprosy is a disease that you've probably heard of before. In the Bible, Jesus heals the lepers. He cleanses the lepers, actually. There's a lot of stigmatism about this disease, especially in ancient times. Lepers were seen as unclean. They were cursed by God as a result of their sin, and therefore these people were cast outside of the city and kind of left to rot away in very poor conditions. There's a lot of superstition around the disease. But as it turns out, it's not actually very contagious. And yet, it's present around the world, from Hawaii all the way to the Middle East and China. So how did a disease that can't really be transmitted get all the way around the world? Well, it originated in Egypt. The first records that we have of this disease are from papyrus rolls around 1550 BC. And also in India, around 600 BC, there are some writings from that time that describe a disease a lot like leprosy. Again, in ancient times, a lot of skin diseases that produced lesions the way that leprosy does were all kind of grouped together as leprosy. And today we know that they had different agents, but these types of symptoms have been seen all the way back in ancient times. And the disease spread from Egypt and India all the way to Greece with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, and then later in the Roman Empire, when they went around conquering other territories during their conquests, they would bring back diseases from these different areas, and leprosy was one of them. So you start to see records of leprosy in Rome, in the Roman Empire, around 62 BC. And it didn't spread very far from there until the Crusades. With all of that war and blood and gore, the bacteria was actually able to make it all the way to Ireland by 550 AD. We're not quite sure when it first came to the United States, the continental United States at least. But we start to see records of attempts at curing the disease or establishing care facilities, starting in about the 1800s, and really reaching a peak around 1920. So the disease was definitely present, beginning in about the 19th century, and it even made it to Hawaii in the 1830s. The agent of this disease is Mycobacterium leprae. It's a bacteria, rod-shaped, acid-fast, and microaerophilic, which causes it to invade the cells. It's an intracellular parasite, and in order to find this environment of about 3% oxygen, really low concentrations of oxygen that it likes and prefers, the bacterium will enter into the cells of the host. It has a very long replication cycle. About 13 days is how long it takes for Mycobacterium leprae to replicate just once. And this causes symptoms to be very long in coming. So when someone is infected with a Mycobacterium leprae, the bacteria won't really take over their body and start to express itself on the outside until maybe months to even years later. So it can be very difficult to kind of track the sources of this disease. There are very few known vectors. So far, humans are the only definite vector. Armadillos are pretty suspected. They can carry the disease, though they're not a very big threat to humans as far as transmitting it. And then in research, the only other place that scientists have been able to culture the virus is in the footpads of mice. So there are very few known vectors of this disease, which makes it surprising that it's made its way all the way around the world. But it is very difficult to culture in the lab, which means there hasn't been a whole lot of research done on it. There are only a few ways in which the disease can be transmitted. The bacteria, they attack the peripheral nervous system, but once they enter the body, on their way to the peripheral nerves, they tend to take up residence in mucosal membranes and in the skin. So, being present in those, some of the modes of transmission would be through airborne transmission, droplet transmission, coughing and sneezing. If somebody with leprosy coughs on you, you should really get checked out. But then also through lesions. So one of the symptoms, or one of the signs of the disease is lesions on the skin. And certain types of these lesions have what are called globi. And if these clumps of bacteria in the lesion. So if you come into contact with a lanced lesion or secretions from the lesion, you can contract the disease by coming into the contact with that high concentration of bacteria. So, like I said, once it enters your body, works its way towards the nervous system, it can start to produce visible signs, which would include skin lesions, patchy skin. Some patients have discolored patches of their skin, sometimes on the face, and usually it's just a portion of lighter colored skin. And the skin can also sometimes become really thick and hard, and it's also accompanied by a lot of loss of feeling and numbness. The fingers and toes are really susceptible to this kind of numbness, and that's due to the attack on the peripheral nervous system. You can also see weakness and paralysis also as a result of the attack on peripheral nervous system. Another thing that leprosy can produce in the body are like ulcers and secondary infections, just because of how much the immune system has been weakened. You can also suffer from things like that. Not directly related to leprosy, but kind of coming as a result of it. But as far as the expression of leprosy in the body goes, there are several different types. There's actually a total of 5. But the 2 main types that your body can express, ways your body can respond to the bacteria's presence, are called tuberculoid leprosy and lepromatous leprosy. Now, tuberculoid leprosy, if a doctor were to see this, it would tell him that your body is having a high cellular immune response to the bacteria. So you're making an effort to fight it off. Skin lesions do develop, but the amount of pain is mild, and there are no globi present in the lesions. There is bacteria, but not large clumps of it. So the amount of bacteria able to circulate throughout your body is relatively low. But lepromatous leprosy is where we start to see very severe symptoms. This type of leprosy is indicative of no host resistance. So those bacteria are able to just come right in and take up residence inside your cells. But because of that, your immune system starts to attack your own cells. And that's what causes a lot of the disfigurement and a lot of the pain, a lot of the paralysis is this attack on your own body's nervous system. And so, as a result, this is a much more severe form of leprosy than tuberculoid leprosy. And it produces large lumps and bumps, and these are the types of lesions that have globi in them. So it is a very contagious form of leprosy. The other types of leprosy kind of fall in between. These are is a very polarized look at the disease. But the other 3 types are called borderline tuberculoid, so that would be kind of a little bit more serious than tuberculoid, but still very similar, shows very similar signs. Borderline lepromatous leprosy, which is not quite as bad, but it does look very similar to lepromatous leprosy. And then there's also one in between those 2 called mid-borderline leprosy. And it just represents a spectrum of how severe your response, how severely the bacteria has been able to take over your body and express itself in these hallmarks of the disease. So I have some pictures for you guys. On the left is a picture of a tuberculoid lesion. So you can see it's very mild. Doesn't look too terrible, but there is bacteria, Mycobacterium leprae, present in it. And then the other extreme would be on the right side, where you have these two images on the right are lepromatous leprosy. Especially the picture of the man's face is described as active and untreated leprosy. So this is the kind that people will probably have seen in biblical times and really try to avoid. And you can really see the disfigurement that this disease causes, and some of that's due to like a reabsorption of cartilage, causing your body to be able to form these large lumps. And in the center here is a picture of borderline tuberculoid leprosy. So you can see there's much more discoloration. It looks a little more inflamed, a little angry, but it's still definitely more similar to tuberculoid leprosy than to lepromatous leprosy. These are some of my sources. I really hope that you enjoyed this, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.